Especially today, and so after they've taken out the money that they paid my 3 hours work here, then that money, the rest goes into our general maintenance fund here. So you're contributing very much to the maintenance of the building, both inside and out. So just to explain that to you, because it must be a bit strange when you get charged extra. I will be telling you about other tours that we'll be doing later in the year. And by the way, I don't just do this. I work in visitor reception where you have your card scanned or where you pay to get in as well. So I've been very busy this week when we get to the end of the day. But I'm delighted to see you all. Thank you for coming on the tour. First of all, you were all wearing those lanyards with the labels on. Yes, it struck me yesterday that the people who came in looked as though they were evacuees in the Second World War. And somebody said to me, "Oh, you're not old enough to have been around then." And I said, "Well, actually, no, I wasn't. But I was born not long after the end of the Second World War." And I watched. If you watch Good Night, Mr. Tom, if you haven't seen it, you'll know why I was inspired. And then there was a follow-up more recently. They did a follow-up. Anyway, enough of that. I'm not here to advertise. Health and safety. We are going down into the cellars, so you will have to go down a number of steps. I will give you information about each set of steps you're going down to protect you, and so don't worry about that. As I say, I'll tell you exactly what to do. We're also going into the cellars where there are uneven floors. There are drainage channels. Now don't panic, it's not sewage water you're seeing, it's actually surface water, and you have to be blind and deaf not to realise that for the last goodness knows how many weeks it's been absolutely pouring away, as it does quite often this time of year. So you will see some water flowing. It hasn't got out of the channels, so there's no slippery areas, and I will sort of remind you about that. My advice to you throughout this tour is please look down every time we're moving, because you might not have noticed there are little steps here and there as well in one of the cellars that we're actually going into. And the final thing to mention, we are going down into the cellars where the light is slightly different. It's much better than it used to be. So just give you take that into account as well. But the important thing is look down. And I will warn you whenever there's a change in height on anywhere that we're going. Right, having said all that, is there anybody who feels, I don't feel very happy about going down there? You're okay. I've never had a refusal yet. So one day somebody's going to say, "Oh, I'm not going down there then." Okay, right, follow me. In a moment, I'll have one of my colleagues who will be sweet Trish, who will be, not the Trish that Emel called you, it's another one. And she's there to make sure we don't lose anyone on the way. It is rather difficult to lose that, because I can actually see you all the way through this tour. That's not the case in some of them, but this one it is. And as I say, I will tell you more about other trips and things and tours that are going on throughout this year. So, if you'd like to follow me in an orderly procession. And there's a little more space there. Well done, nobody tripped. Good. Right. I'm going to go over here, so I'm going to... Right, okay, yeah. Right, so you've just come down into the wine cellar. And when you were coming towards that little step I was warning everybody about, did anybody notice in that little room, as you're coming towards the step, was there something you noticed in there?
Yeah, the table.
It wasn't a seat, but yes, you did notice what it was. It was a table attached to the wall. Right, that is because only one servant was ever allowed in this room when it was used as a wine cellar, and that was the butler. And the reason was that he had to keep stock control, which meant that he would know how many bottles had gone out, so he could make sure that it was kept constantly refilled as necessary. And also, some of the wines in here were rather expensive. I'll tell you more about what happened with the wines, or to some of the wines, when they arrived here, because they didn't all arrive in quite the same way. So he would control things, and then he would use that little table out there to put the required number of bottles of wine to start the meals in the 2 dining rooms that are here. Who's been to Tredegar House before? Yeah, okay. You may have noticed that we've restored our second dining room. There's the large brown room, which has got little evidence it was a dining room, but it's got all the wood panel in it. You know the one I mean straight away. It's got the oldest floor in the house as well. But then there is another room, which is the Victorian dining room, where there is a dining table set up now. If you'd come up until just towards the end of last year, for quite a number of years, we've been displaying that room in its original 17th century format, which was a family drawing room. But I'm really pleased they put it back into the other dining room, because now you don't have to imagine both the dining rooms. It's only one you've got to imagine. So he put the bottles out there. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of bottles in here. Unfortunately, none of them have got any wine, and I can promise you that because I check them regularly in the hope that some kind person on the senior staff is going to put a bottle in there so I can take it home. But no, there's never any in there. Those are just props there. Right, so we've got all that bit out of the way. Next thing, I'd like to tell you about the butler's perks as far as this. Oh, by the way, this we now know is not the 17th century wine cellar. The main part of the house, the red brick, was constructed in the 17th century, having had some of the fortified Tudor manor house and its outbuildings partly demolished. There's only one little bit left now, which you'll see as the servants' hall in the very end of the tour when you go around. But this was actually started as a boot room, and over there we have a table. Now we have a mystery. We don't know whether that was something to do with the boot cleaning, or whether, because there's a channel that goes right through the middle of it underneath the top slab, we think it might possibly, and this is what a number of visitors yesterday thought they think it was, is that's where they put the white wine to start it getting even more chilled, because there was a draft going, and there might have even been ice under there as well. But we don't know that for definite. So if you are keen followers of the National Trust, and you're either a member, which I'd recommend if you go into a lot of properties, or you like going to the properties, if you ever go somewhere and they tell you definitely that they know what that is and they've got one, then can you send it a message on the internet to the Tredegar House site, mark for Chris, and I'll be the first one to be able to tell everybody else what it is. Okay, butler's perks. Now the first one, quite logical. For every 6 bottles of wine that were served in the dining rooms, the butler was given a bottle of wine for his consumption. Now that means he was either a terrible alcoholic, or he gave it away to friends and relatives, or he might have had a little profit-making thing where he sold off these surplus bottles, all of which was perfectly okay. The second perk, well, I've got to explain a little bit of the background of what this mansion and mansions like it would have been used for, mainly used for. It's a rather unusual perk that we're going to talk about now. In the Victorian era in particular, the country house estate was very much something you showed off about. And if you had a country house estate, you very often had a very nice townhouse in London. By a townhouse, I do mean a mansion. The Morgans had a mansion in Portman Square, and it was rather big, and they were part of London society even before this mansion was built, because they had property up there by the family marrying well. And so you would get your posh friends around, and they would say, you would invite them down to your country house for a country weekend, and it was all very competitive, you see, because there was a lot of judgment going on. It's never spoken about openly, but when you were invited to somebody else's country estate, you'd be looking to see, oh, how comfortable was the accommodation, how good was the food, what sort of entertainment did they offer you, and other things like that. And that competitiveness extended right down to the height of the candles in the main rooms in the house. They couldn't go below a certain height, because if they got below that a certain height, that meant it was a sign that you couldn't afford to put candles around the house anymore, and your wealth was diminishing. So keeping up appearances, as Mrs. Bouquet would say. But anyway, and she wasn't in the Victorian era, so I don't think she was. So that was it was all about. And the butler, he went round checking those on a daily basis, and when they were too short, he took them away, which leaves me with a lovely picture. What happened to those? We don't know exactly. Did he melt them down and make bigger candles and get some wick to put in the middle? Or was it on the day when he actually collected some candles, did he have a nice bright room in the attic where he slept? Because the dormitories were in the attic, and the housekeeper had her own single room. The other servants had to share rooms when they were same-sex rooms as well, closely guarded. You'll find out more about that if you happen to come here when we do the attics tours, which we probably will do in the autumn. But did he have, on the night that he collected them, a nice bright room, and the rest of the time he had to eat a lot of carrots? But there we are. Enough of that nonsense. I'm going to move you on now into the next cellar. And again, we have some steps. I'll be standing where the floor starts. And again, there's a handle to grab onto, or a rail to hang on to there. And also, this is the first time you'll experience very uneven floors. You will see the drainage channels in here. Interesting, there's not much water going down every time I come down. And I want you to go to the far side, and again, there are little steps there, so eyes down. Not playing bingo, but you will fall over. Okay.
Very big.
Sort of that's for shimmy. Not quite.
Well done. Watch out for the little specks going towards the front there. There we go. Everybody's looking that way, and I can't. Right, okay, I am on a platform, and for those of you who haven't worked it out, my hobby is amateur theatre. So that's why I bounce about a bit, and mainly musical theatre, by the way. But anyway, I'm not going to perform for you now. You've got to come at Christmas time if you want to hear me sing, okay, and I will make you sing as well. But here we are on a platform. It's hollow. I'm going to do that one time too many and go straight through. So what's underneath here that's hollow? Well, can you see there are two stone heads? Well, that's the clue to what's underneath what I'm standing on. It's actually a spring. And if you go into historic houses, and particularly those in the Victorian era, because it became very popular, you will celebrate what they did in the Bronze Ages. You had a head near where your spring was. I'll explain more about that in a moment. And so we've got two heads here. We believe they're probably around the 17th century, when the main part of the house was remodelled, knocking down most of what was the fortified Tudor manor house. So, and you see the last bit of that when you get to the servants' hall right at the end of your visit here. I haven't already said that, have I? Because once I start doing this tour more than once in a row, I sometimes repeat things, so it's not going bonkers, it's just that I might have forgotten how far we've got. So, what's the significance of the heads? This is where it gets a bit sinister. Because back in the Bronze Age, the people lived in villages, surrounded by a big wooden fencing facade thing to protect the villagers, but the spring often was outside that barrier around the Bronze Age village, and so the spring had to be carefully guarded, not with a guard there, but by people watching. And so if any strangers came to the outside of the barrier to the village, and they didn't recognise them, some of the villagers would come out and challenge them and say, "What are you doing here, and why are you near our spring?" And if they couldn't give a reasonable answer, no ifs or buts, off their head came, stuck on a pike alongside the spring, as a warning to anybody who might be thinking, well, we'll try it on, we can poison their water supply, or if we wanted to take over their village, we can kill them off, because with no water they're going to die very quickly if we keep them under siege. So that's the story of it all. But the spring here has a much less sinister purpose. Because, and also, right from the Bronze Age, it's always been considered in the pagan religion and even religions beyond that, that where the spring water rises from the ground, it's a very sacred, spiritual place. So there is this feeling of, can you feel it? The spirituality? I'll ask you out again in a few minutes when I tell you a bit more. So, let's go back to why is there's a big bath under here, not the sort you take a bath in, but it's only as deep as that there, and it's very cold water anyway, because this is the receiving cellar, and it's called the receiving cellar because this is where they received and stored barrels of wine. So a lot of the wine came in barrels, and then there would be a tap to decant the wine into empty bottles that would be corked and then put in that wine cellar up there. And I said about rotating the stock, well, that's how they kept the stock control going. But there were, of course, bottles that came in as well with wine already in them, the vintage wine, the very expensive wine, hence some of the security that you've got in that particular wine cellar up there when it started being used as the wine cellar. So they were recycling back in the 17th century even, because they would wash the empty bottles that came from the dining room and then fill them with the barrels, and so on and on. It went round and round. Right. I've got a bit of audience participation now. It's not coming to mind, but you might keep that in a moment. We have a wooden chest here, and I want somebody who's got a nice clear voice and who's feeling very brave to answer or to propose a question to me, and I will answer it. So I'd like somebody to ask me, Chris, why have you got a wooden chest on the stage? Who's going to have a go? Who's brave?
Chris, why have you got a wooden chest on the stage?
That's where we put visitors who ask too many questions. You didn't see that coming, did you? Okay, so now we get to something a little bit more sinister again. How many of you been to the house before? No? Oh, right. Yeah, you've been before, right. So you will hear about a chap called Evan Morgan, who was the 4th Lord Tredegar and took over the estate and its responsibilities in 1934 when his father died. Now, Evan was the bad boy of the family. He is an outrageous character, the most outrageous member of the family. Lots of contradictions in his life. I'm not going to do too many spoilers because our volunteers will be very cross if you want to chat to them. I've told you all the juicy bits, but there's a lot more than this that you can find out about. But Evan doesn't start off too badly in this part of the story because he decided, against the wishes of the family, because they were mainly Protestant, to become a Catholic. And between you and I, we think he only did it to annoy his father, because he liked annoying and shocking his father anyway. So he became a Catholic, and not very long after that, the Catholic Church decided, and we're on to a good thing here, because we can make him a lay papal chamberlain, which meant that not only would he go to the Vatican every year for a week to strengthen his faith, but he would be able to talk to other rich friends and hopefully bring them into the Catholic Church. So very thoughtful, that very good idea for making sure that the Catholic Church maintains its funds and grew the number of the Catholic community. So can't blame them, that's really good indeed. So there he is, very devout, very upright. Not quite. Because his hobby was to practice the occult. In other words, he was into black magic. And he, as you will find out, one of the many things you're going to find out about it, your hair will curl. Anybody, well, yes, there's a gentleman follically challenged over there. Your hair will grow up again, to some surprise. But anyway, he would practice black magic in his bedroom. But we also know, because it's been described by his mentor in the occult, Alistair Crowley, who was known as the Beast, an expert in the 1920s throughout Europe in the occult and black magic. We know that he had a magic room, but we don't know where it was. However, the strongest possibility about where it was is here. So, can you feel the spirits moving around here? And I know it's cold because we're below ground level, but there could be another reason why it's cold. So we're not going to linger too much longer down here, just in case there's anything left over. But certainly we know that this is likely to be the most likely place that they would have had his magic room. And apart from the fact that you've got the spiritual side of it with the spring that I'm standing over, that door, because it's the wine cellar, was kept locked, except when you had to go through it, and that door there was kept locked unless you needed to go to that cellar as well. So it's completely secure, and they could do whatever they liked in their ceremonies, and believe me, they did. So that's what was going on down here. So as I say, if you feel a bit of a presence, that is why. And to help you get into that sort of mood as well, we have a lot of filming done here at Tredegar House, and I can tell you that no less than, I think it's 14 episodes of Doctor Who have been partly filmed here, and the latest one you will see in the summer. That's all I'm going to tell you. I do know a little bit about the time period it's setting, but I'm not. You'll find out that as it goes along. And also, for instance, we've had other things filmed here, including in 2018 a supernatural thriller called Requiem. Did anybody see it? Filmed by BBC Wales. It was about a Welsh village where a young girl disappeared, and when I say young girl, she was under 10, and they didn't know where she went, and there was a mystery to it. And as you watch the episodes going along, it became very apparent that there was an occult type gathering in the village there, and there was a scene where they undertook an occult type ceremony, and it was filmed in here. Now, what I do have to tell you is curious. As far as we are aware, the producer and director and BBC had no idea of the potential background of this room. And when I saw that scene in that particular episode, shivers went up the back of my spine, and I thought, if only they knew how close to the truth they were. So I'll mention Requiem possibly again a bit later on. But we've got one other thing I want to talk about before we leave here, unless anybody wants to dash out now. Anyway, over here, by the way, these things up here were props that we used to use when Newport City Council ran the property direct. It's now, the property is leased by the National Trust. Don't panic if you're a trust member, because although they pay, it's a 50-year lease, a lower rental is paid each year to Newport City Council. There is money that comes back from the council, in fact I think it's more than the rental, to help maintain the property. And the trust as a charity can attract grants which the council could important. So it rescued the building in a lot of ways because the council were worried about the amount of money it was costing to continue here. So that's how it all works. But anyway, when Newport were running it directly, they used to have Halloween events here for 3 days leading up to the closest day to Halloween, or Halloween itself, if it was in a Friday, Saturday or Sunday. We would frighten people to death coming round. Some of the things we did were ridiculous, and one of the things that happened, if you came, as you approached the entrance to the house, there would be gardeners hidden in the undergrowth with chainsaws, no blades in them, but they didn't know that, so they used to go charging across the gardens, trying to hide them. Now that was just some of the things that went on, but the trust are far more sensible, because apart from the fact that it really didn't conform that well with health and safety rules, because people panicked. I actually made a grown man cry in one of the sketches I did, which I was very pleased about. But it also wasn't good for the fabric of the building, so the trust don't do that anymore. We're much more. We do a lot of Christmas though, which I will be emphasising to you as we go along. So these are all props from things that happened, except for that thing over there. Now, what on earth is that strange piece of machinery? No, Doctor Who did not leave it behind. It's not part of the time machine. No, Evan Morgan again. He continued the idea of having country house parties here, and they were very extravagant, and the amount of booze was incredible, so much so that is an industrial scale 1930s soda fountain. Yeah. If you look at it, there's a cylinder on that bit towards the back there, and inside there you can still see a bottle. So that's where they made the fizzy drinks to go in with your shorts. So there we are. On that interesting note, it's about time we left the spirits in the bottle and wherever else. And going to the next step. When we go into the next step, you'll be aware of this step, because I just placed this and really went over. But also, when you go through the door here, the frame is actually, the bottom of the frame is raised up from the floor, so you have to step over it, otherwise you'll trip over and land in the drainage channel. Okay? Yes? It's a big door, and actually it was... Right, now, what is this room? This is actually the servants' beer cellar. You did hear correctly. It's for the beer cellar, specifically for the servants. It's not quite what you might think though. Let me tell you about how it became the servants' beer cellar. Because a practice grew up here for the family, the Morgan family, who were in charge of the property for over 500 years. They developed an idea that they would give all the servants, male and female, gather them here 11 o'clock every morning to give them a pint of beer to start the main part of their working day, and put them in slack, in relaxing. Maybe they were worrying about things, so they would give them a pint of beer. Good idea, don't you think? I'd like a pint of beer. I don't think I would actually get very confused very easily these days, drinking things. But anyway, this started, and all was well until some of the young female servants who were single discovered that the pint of beer was a way of chatting up the handsome male single servants. And when I say that, they were footmen. They all had to be, you'll be all right, they had to be about 6 foot tall. And they would also look very dashing because they were in elaborate livery, that they were in breeches and a white wig. I don't know how you feel about the white wig, but they were always quite striking, and they were chosen for that. It was all about making a good impression. And then you have the stable boys, and then you have the grooms. And so the single young ladies realised, hang on, I've got a pint, I don't really like beer. I can go over to the young man of my choice and I can say, would you like an extra pint, because I don't really like it. And from there they could start chatting them together and they could chat them up. And so this was going on. The housekeeper was a bit alarmed about this because she felt that there shouldn't be too strong an association between servants of opposite sexes, and it was discouraged. And so she was getting a bit concerned about this. And then the butler got even more concerned because he was the most senior male member of staff, in charge of most of the male members of staff, particularly in the house. And he realised that there was a big problem starting to happen here, because when there was a particularly handsome and athletic young man, tall, well, very well, and they would get more than one admirer from the single lady, so he could end up with anything up to 4 pints or more. Which is not conducive to maintaining high standards in the dining room, is it? I mean, wine all over the guests and gravy all over the table. No, they can't have that. So the butler and the housekeeper got together, and a strict rule was imposed. You can continue having the beer, but be like the older ladies, young ladies. If you don't want your pint of beer, do not claim it, and then we won't have drunken male servants because you're trying to chat them up. Well, I don't think you use that word, but there we are. So that's the story of that. The other thing that you might find interesting about this cellar and the one that we just come from is what were they used for in World War II? In World War II, there were air raid shelters, weren't there? In big mansions like this, you had to have somewhere that was safe and secure, preferably low down in the ground. So this became the servants' air raid shelter. And incidentally, talking about World War II, one of my grandfathers was a fire warden over the other side of town. So he knew more than, we didn't have an awful lot of air raid here, and there wasn't a lot of bombing in Newport, but nevertheless, there were worrying times. Next door, the receiving cellar, was the family air raid shelter, and Evan was in charge at the time. So, have a guess what was in there? There was a cocktail. On that strange note, I'm going to tell you more about filming now, and also we've got 2 more cellars to look at. One is quite small, and that's where we're going to start, and that's where I'm going to tell you what I hope you will find an entertaining story about another piece of filming that went on here. So if you come this way. Down in this area. So, behind me here, I have a very elaborate door. It could do with a bit of care and repair, but that's how it's developed over the century. It is dating back to the 17th century, it's the original. And this decoration on it, some of which is slightly missing, is known as chinoiserie style, which is a posh word for saying it's Chinese style. And as I say, 17th century, you can see there's a big keyhole there, so it had to be securely locked. And to make sure whatever was in there was kept secure, we've got wooden battens here, and we've got metal fixings for it. And behind these metal fixings and battens, there are actually spikes. So there's something pretty expensive kept in there. Well, we're pretty sure this is where the original wine cellar was, and this is where the most expensive wines, the ones that came already bottled, were definitely stored, and also probably the strong spirits. Now, we were in the the Victorian wine cellar when we started the tour, and there were lots of bottles, no wine in there, because I've checked and I've never been able to find any. But are we going to find some expensive wine or even some spirits in here, and not the type that Evan conjured up? Let's have a look, shall we? There we go. Oh dear. It looks empty to most of you, but over to the left here, there's a big pile of rubble. Well, it might be a pile of rubble to you, but it's very special rubble, and it's not even Marks and Spencer rubble. Not Marks and Spencer, Marks and Spencer food, and he'll say it's Marks and Spencer food, etc. Right. So it's not. It's very special because that is bits of masonry which have fallen off the house itself and the outbuildings and other buildings on the estate. And what we do now is that our staff are responsible for maintaining the building. Whenever they find something like that, and by the way, you never have it fall on anybody yet, you never know. When they find something, they look where they find it, above it, and they see where it's come from, and they either replace it or they do something about getting a replacement brought in for it. So that's why we store that. We know exactly where every bit has come from. And I'll tell you a story from yesterday. For those of you near the front, you can see the back of a naked figure. So, yeah, right. Well, somebody said, is that Gollum? And I said, not unless he's changed sex, because that's actually a woman. But, yeah. And I don't know where that came from, and I've never heard any stories about where he's going to go back to. So there we are. So this is the cellar, but I haven't quite finished with this cellar yet. I'm going to shut the door, because this door features in a film in the story. Now, you... So we are now in the final cellar. So you've seen the servants' beer cellar. This is the family beer cellar. If you are going to have refreshments whilst you're here, or you already have them, you will probably be aware that our restaurant is called the Brew House because it was actually the on-site brewery here for the family. And prior to that building, or part of it, the foundations, were where the medieval stables were. But it was a brewery, lots of brews were made, including a very special one, which I'll talk about in a moment. And the weaker beers were the ones that they took to the servants. So it wasn't the full strength ones, but it was still enough to get drunk again 4 or 5 pints. But so that's the connection with the beers here. And the Morgans stored the family beers, including very special ones, in this cellar. And they had a tradition on this wall of having barrels which weren't the top grade, but they were still pretty good, along the wall, and they named them after lady members of the family. I'm going to give you random names for them, in case I get confused on them. So, for instance, you'd see Lady Mary, and you see Lady Catherine, Lady Elizabeth, etc., and Lady Rosamond. And then the one in the middle here, not where the millstone is now, but the millstone wasn't there, that was a very big barrel, and that was the Prince of Wales one. It wasn't given to him, that was opened on very special occasions. And those special occasions would be births, deaths, marriages, or significant birthdays. Or when a member of the family, of which there were quite a few, was successful in being elected to become a member of Parliament. And also, there were Christmas and New Year celebrations. In the 19th century, for instance, Charles Morgan, the father of the first Lord Tredegar, he set up a tradition of Christmas celebrations that started on Christmas Eve and went all the way through to the 12th of January. Imagine that partying all that time. And so a lot of beer was consumed then, and there was a 12th night masquerade ball here as well. So that's when the very best beer was distributed as well. But there were more beer barrels than that, because remember I said about being invited to country house estates? Well, if you were very wealthy, you probably had a brewery on your estate as well. And if you were particularly happy with the entertainment and comforts that you'd been offered here, and the food, etc., you would send a barrel or two of your own. So they would have their names on there. So I'm not saying Nelson came here, because I know he didn't. But the famous people who did come here, the army and navy people, etc., they would send their barrels and they had the name of the family on them. So it was very interesting. It was like a who's who down here. I tell you what does intrigue me. When there were special occasions and they had to use the barrels down here that were stored in the family cellar, I can imagine the head of the household at the time saying to the butler, "Will you go down to the cellar and crack open Lady Mary?" Which sounds rather violent, really, but there we are. One more thing to tell you about. I mentioned the mystery table in the first cellar we were in. Over there, just behind you, don't worry, you're not going to pantomime things, I think you'll follow. There's a staircase. It's got brickwork under it and stone on the top. But it doesn't go anywhere. And there's no evidence in the wall, outside, just at the top of where the staircase is, of a doorway being there, because you can usually see where the bricks are there. So we don't know what it was for. But interestingly, when I told you about the filming of Requiem, they used this as a room in the mansion that they were in. It was the library. And this millstone was from the cider mill. And there would have been another millstone to grind down the apples and extract the juice. And we know it was used for alcohol rather than flour, etc., because there was a flour mill as well. Because it's got, I think it's K. Thomas Brewer on there, which is a bit strange because I don't think you could call somebody who makes cider a brewer, do you? You normally say a cider maker, craftsman. So there we are. That concludes our visit. I do hope you've enjoyed it. We will be doing hopefully more cellars tours later in the year, around September. If you liked what you've seen, then do come and see us again. We've also got scheduled Folklore and the Unexplained tours. Now, those are a bit more expensive. They're in the evening, they're 2 hours long. Last year and the year before, they were £12 to go and see. You get 2 tour guides. I'm on some of them, on half of it. And basically, that's all about more sinister traditions within the house, how they dealt with certain family issues. And also, I interviewed members of staff, and they told me about things that had happened to them which they couldn't explain. And I've had a few things happen to me as well, so that's all in there as well. So if you fancy that, those will be on the 2nd, 3rd and 4th weekends in October. Leading up to Halloween, and there may be more this year. But the other thing I have to give you an early warning on, last year they sold out in 48 hours when they went on sale at the beginning of September. So from the middle of August, keep looking at our website if you're interested in those. I can promise you, you will have a night to remember. The other thing I can promise you, you might get a bit sort of taken up with the sinister nature of things, but I can guarantee no one will jump out on you. What I can't guarantee is that nothing strange will happen during the tour, because we thought it did on one occasion, but you'll have to wait to go on the tour to find out what happened. Right, where is my speaker gone? She's over there, right. If you'd like to follow her up to where you started the tour and continue your visit around her, thank you for coming to see us. And if everybody has come up with this, we've been back to the illumination for the first time last year, they're going to be here next year. I'm inside the house again, I will make you see it.